A report this morning in the Washington Times by Audrey Hudson claims a newly released government report backs eyewitness accounts of suspicious behavior by 13 Middle Eastern men on a Northwest Airlines flight back on June 29, 2004. But was it a terrorist dry run? Yes or no? Join us right now, a woman who was a passenger on that flight, journalist and author of Terror in the Skies, Annie Jacobson, joining us from L.A. Annie, did it seem like a dry run to you?
Well, it certainly did when I was in the air, and that's why I've been so vocal about writing about it and putting forth the idea that comes to me from Homeland Security agents across the country, the rank-and-file guys in the field who are saying, have said, and continue to say, Flight 327 was a dry run for a future terrorist attack involving planes.
So do you feel vindicated by this Inspector General's report?
Well, I don't know if vindicated is the right word because, of course, this is not about me. This is really about air safety in America. And when you have a situation on board a flight that was so seriously a threat, I mean, anyone that wants to read that report that's now been declassified can see the kind of intense situation that was unfolding on that plane for 4 hours. And then they can read about how the TSA, Federal Air Marshal Service, went to great lengths to cover up how badly they mismanaged
Why did they do
handling.
that? Why did they do that?
Well, the reason that they did it, as we learn in the declassified report, is because there wasn't a communication between the different agencies. We saw that before 9/11. It was called the wall. Supposedly, the Department of Homeland Security was going to break down that wall.
Right.
Instead, we've seen the wall get higher. I mean, we're talking about, I was on a flight with 13 Syrian men.
Right.
Syria is a state sponsor of terrorism. 8 of those men had positive hits, we find out later in this report, from criminal databases.
Right.
And the lead Syrian on that flight was involved in a previous airline security incident. And yet, these men were let go when we were met
Right.
by dozens of federal agents at Los Angeles Airport.
And also,
that ought to really raise the hair on anybody's back.
Absolutely, and a bunch of them had visas that had expired, and then after the event, I think they extended the visas inexplicably. But Annie, something else about it, Department of Homeland Security officials initially denied the complaints and said, oh, passengers are just being hysterical.
Well, of course they did, and that's what we're seeing out of Department of Homeland Security, particularly TSA. I can't wait to see what your talking head from the TSA has to say about this, because it's so clear that they classified that report, because everything that I wrote this all in my book 2 years ago. What happened on that flight, what a threat it was, and how botched that investigation was. TSA doesn't want people like me speaking out about their poor performance. It makes people question what on earth is really going on with our billion-dollar Homeland Security budget.
All right, Annie Jacobson, thank you very much for joining us live this morning from Los Angeles. We're going to talk straight ahead with that representative of the TSA regarding Flight 327 in about 2 minutes. Also straight. All right, now let's hear what the government has to say on the issue. We go now to TSA spokesperson Ellen Howe, who joins us live from D.C. Good morning to you, Ellen.
Good morning, Steve.
Okay, so we were talking this morning about this Washington Times report that talks about the Inspector General for Homeland Security taking a look at investigating whether or not there was suspicious activity on this Northwest flight back in 2004. A bunch of your own employees, air marshals, say it was a dry run. What say you?
Well, I don't think it's a bunch of our employees that said that. I think Annie Jacobson has 1 or 2 sources out of literally thousands of air marshals. And certainly I've read this report, and it claims that there was suspicious activity on the flight, which our air marshals observed, and they acted appropriately at the time. And we spent quite a long time investigating this as well. It was not a probe. There was suspicious activity.
Right.
But what we at TSA do is we look into behavior, and we use behavior observation in the airport and elsewhere, because what you want to do is see how people are acting. You cannot stereotype people as terrorists. You have to look at their behavior.
So, Ellen, you're saying this was not a dry run?
No, it was not. There was suspicious activity, and it was investigated, but it was not a dry run. And the report does not conclude that it was a dry run, Steve.
Well, the report does conclude that there were a number of missteps by government officials, including the failure to file an incident report until a month after the matter became public. Also, Ellen, you know, I think the Washington Times had this released back in 2006, but the entire report was blacked out except for 2 sentences.
Well, the report was released this week, and people can read it online if they want to. It is there. Certainly, we don't have an issue with the report. What we're concerned is about a risk-based approach to security and providing security to the traveling public.
All right. So you're disputing your own air marshals who, like this guy Robert McLean, former air marshal, said, quote, "This report is evidence of Homeland Security executives attempting to downplay an unmistakable dry run." So you're just saying that just is not what you have found.
That is not what the report found, Steve.
All right. Ellen Howe, TSA spokesman, we thank you very much for joining us live from D.C.